the consensus wide receiver one, but is he in with a shout of being the 101 in rookie drafts? I'm here with the fantastic At Daddy's Home FF to break down Tet McMillan, the big-bodied wide receiver out of Arizona. Mike, are you a Tet fan or are you a non-believer?
No, I'm a Tet fan. I do not have him as my wide receiver one. We'll get to the wide receiver one on my board later. But I do have him as wide receiver two. I do think that draft capital is going to play out, that he's going to end up in that top 12 to 15 picks. And really what you have to like about him, and you hit it at the top, 6'4", 219. I mean, the prototypical big-bodied wide receiver, great route runner, good size, good catch radius, can run after the catch. Really, the only thing that you look at with Tet McMillan is the top end speed, coming in at a 4.55. Not exactly a burner, but I still think at his size, more than fast enough to be successful. The other question that's obviously come up, we've seen the most recent quotes, Rich, flurrying through Twitter and Blue Sky and all the social media, is that Tet McMillan does not like to watch film, apparently. And I think people are really overrating that. I don't like to do a lot of things work-related when I'm not required to be working. So I see no concerns there, but you're going to hear about that a lot. But overall, yeah, I think Tet is a very, very good wide receiver. I think the problem is that we don't really have, in my opinion, one of those generational stud talents in this particular wide receiver class, unless you count the unicorn we'll talk about later, who we're not sure is actually even going to be a wide receiver when he gets to the NFL. But Tet McMillan falls into a very strong low-end wide receiver one, high-end wide receiver two play for me. Big fan, and we'll be slotting him in probably around the 104, 105 in my one quarterback rookie drafts.
Yeah, I think for me, you hit the nail in the head in that T-Mac is a very good prospect. I don't think he's that elite prospect that we've seen over the past few years. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of things to like: the size, the hands, the contested catchability. I think, there's a little bit more I'd like to see from a route running perspective. I think he's kind of solid. I think some of those more basic routes, in breaking routes where he can use his body, things like that, fine. I think there's some nuance that he could be developed there, and maybe this comes back to the fact that he doesn't like to watch film. If maybe there's some nuance that can be added there. I do also think that he's kind of one of these guys that's going to be a really good fantasy prospect. I don't know if he's got that kind of top 5 overall wide receiver ceiling, but yeah, I like him. I just don't love him as such. But before we dive into the numbers, though, if you are finding this for the first time, hit that subscribe button. I can guarantee you will not regret it. So looking at the numbers, obviously, huge production over the last 2 years. Do you have any concerns about potentially him stepping into the league, the volume he's going to see, or do you think that he could be that kind of wide receiver one for a team, or do you think he's going to end up being like a T. Higgins 1B type?
No, I definitely think he can slot in and get that volume. I think in particular, when we look at the top of the draft, there's a lot of wide receiver needy teams that are going to be drafting around the time that we would expect Tet McMillan to go. Now, while I don't expect him to end up in the dream spot, which would be New England at 4, I do not think they're going to make that pick, possibly a trade down and grabbing him. There's a lot of other teams that we could look at kind of lower down in the ranks where he could step in and be that big-time producer. So again, so much fluidity coming out of this draft. We're hearing a lot of talk about potential trades up and down. We're not really 100% certain what the draft order is going to look like, but I do think that someone who's going to invest the draft capital in Tet McMillan is going to get him that volume right out of the gate. So that top 15, top 17 pick, I think we're going to see that. I'm seeing a lot of talk, honestly, about could he potentially play under Mike Evans, for example, to Tampa at 19 if he were to fall that far and learn from him. I don't love that, because I think then he's clearly the third option his rookie year, and I think that's really hard to climb out of. So people that are cheering for that spot, I don't really know how you can get on board with that, but I'm hoping to see him go to a spot where really you're going to see a ton of volume, maybe even as soon as number 6 to the Raiders, pairing up with Brock Bowers there, and then immediately dropping Jacoby Myers, who I'm a very big fan of, to the wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I think for me, he's kind of landing spot agnostic, because there's probably only 3 or 4 teams that I'd consider bad landing spots. I think he's got the ability to, command targets almost wherever he lands, because he's got that inside-outside profile. He's got the ability to play X. Like, I'm really excited about what he could be, and very much looking forward to draft him in my rookie drafts.
If you're looking for the ceiling outcome of any prospect, look no further than Luther Burden. He may have the widest range of outcomes of any player in this draft. 6 foot, 206 pounds, out of Mizzou, an incredibly high-rated prospect coming out of high school. Mike, are you chasing that ceiling, or do you think there's too many concerns for you to be spending premium draft capital on a player like Luther Burden?
I like how you've set this question up knowing darn right well that Luther Burden is my wide receiver 6 in this class, and honestly probably being pushed by Jalen Noel, who we're not going to talk about in this particular podcast. But Luther Burden to me is that outlier that we keep trying to catch. The amount of times we've said someone is going to play the Deebo Samuel role, which, by the way, for those of you listening at home, has produced exactly one 1,000-yard season, if my math is correct. So even if he plays that role in the perfect offense and has McCaffrey get hurt and be forced into a running back role the way that Deebo did to finally hit his ceiling, betting on that is to me, it's a fool's errand. I just don't see what people are looking for. Looking deep into Luther Burden, sure, there's athleticism there. Sure, there's yards after the catch, but it was manufactured touches. I mean, the fact is, on a bad Missouri offense, he wasn't even the top wide receiver on his team. And now we're talking about him being potentially the top wide receiver in this rookie class. I'm not saying he can't hit, Rich. And we've said this for now, I think it's our 4th straight year on this podcast. I never cheer against these kids. I want Luther Burden to hit his ceiling because it'll be good for the NFL and be fun to watch. It is just such a low percentage bet for me that I don't see how we're going to get to a point where Luther Burden becomes a wide receiver 1. I mean, seeing his production dip in 2024 scares me. His route running is not great. He struggles to handle press coverage. I mean, there's a lot with him that I'm getting nervous about. And like we've talked about in previous podcasts with folks like Jalen Waddle, are you going to end up in an offense that's going to use your skills? Because without the manufactured touches, would you be drafting Luther Burden high if I told you he's just going to be running routes and playing wide receiver, no end arounds, nothing out of the backfield, no bubble screens? If he was set to just play wide receiver, we would not be talking about Luther Burden, in my honest opinion. So for me, I think if you've fallen for the gadget plays, if you've fallen for the Rondell Moores, if you've fallen for the Laviska Shenaults, if you've fallen for players like that in the past, don't fall into the trap again. This is a guy who truly, as you mentioned, Tet being landing spot agnostic. I mean, he needs the perfect landing spot. And honestly, with the amount of talent at the wide receiver position and the amount of talent in the NFL right now, I don't see Luther Burden having enough of a game script around him to be successful. And I think the 600-something yards that you saw from him as a senior is probably what you're going to see from him in the NFL. And that's more of a 14th to 15th round dynasty startup pick.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on him than yourself. I think I see the potential. I think he's a really smooth player. I think he's lazy in his route running, but I think when he's kind of switched on and engaged, I think he can separate it well. I think he's got rare ability with the ball in his hands. And I think that, if this was 20 years ago and teams weren't willing to manufacture touches and kind of create things and create free releases, I'd be far more nervous. But I think this is a guy that can line up across the field. He's going to be able to play that kind of Z flanker slot type role. And I think that people will get excited about what he can do rather than necessarily what he can't do. I think for me, it absolutely comes with a huge amount of risk. And I've got to be able to balance that risk with the reward. And if you're saying to me, I need to be drafting Luther Burden as a top 8 pick in kind of rookie drafts, yeah, I'm nervous. I'm not going near it. I'm not willing to do that. But if I can be, a back end first round pick or a high second on a guy that's got this incredible high ceiling, I'm comfortable taking that risk. If I'm having to take him in the first 8 picks, I think that's probably a little bit too rich. And if you do want my ranks, if you do want all the rookie content you are going to need for your rookie drafts, hit that subscribe button, then jump across, hit the join button, become a member of the Sanctuary, silver tier and above, get a free copy of the rookie guide. I just think for me with Luther Burden, I really like chasing that upside outside of those elite picks. And I think, once we get past 8, we're talking about 25% hit rate of them becoming a top 36 wide receiver. I'm happy with the chance of chasing Luther Burden. I think for me, the way he's fallen down draft boards, and there's talk that he's going to fall outside the first round now, that's almost made him slightly more appealing to me because I'm no longer having to pay that huge premium draft capital to go and get him. Do you think that if he were to be, a late first, early second round pick in ADP, once we get that all important draft capital and landing spot, would you be a little bit more interested, Mike?
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of whenever we talk about a player, like you said, it comes to risk reward. For me, I probably have him more as a 203, 204 type pick. I mean, we have such a deep running back class, and obviously the structure of this podcast, we're going to be talking about wide receivers. But when we look at the overall draft, I mean, you're going to be talking about, I have now 5 wide receivers ahead of them, at least 6 running backs and 2 tight ends. So that just to be clear, after that, it becomes such a crapshoot that you're really talking about, like you said, betting on that high-end talent and looking for that one elite skill. So I see Luther Burden being more like an RJ Harvey type pick if you were looking at a running back kind of comparable, where you'd be saying, okay, I have this explosive player who I know is flawed, but has that big playability. I think the problem with Burden is, and that what we really have to think about is that when you have these big play ability elite players who don't have sustainable skill sets, it's not necessarily what their end of the year stats are going to look like, but how often are you going to be comfortable starting them? When you have a player that's going to score the bulk of their points in, say, 4 or 5 games because of broken plays or manufactured touches, a very tough person to put in your lineup. And obviously that dud coming up at the wrong time ends your season. So that's really for me where I think maybe it's in my old age, Rich, but I've started to play it a little bit more safe and started looking at target monsters and started looking at guys that are going to pick up as we'll talk about it. We have a few in this draft, started looking at guys that are truly just going to get the ball in their hands as often as possible. So that's why I have them low, and it's not a hatred of the player. It's truly a fantasy being a weekly game and his consistency scaring me to a point that I'm not sure when I'd be comfortable having him in my lineup.
Ohio State has had a proven track record of delivering incredible receivers for the NFL over the past few years. But is Emeka Egbuka potentially one of the best to come out of there over the last few years? He walks into the league as an absolute route running maestro, a natural separator underneath. Mike, do you think that Emeka Egbuka's got the ceiling that we could potentially be chasing for fantasy, or is he just a high floor, solid double rather than that potential home run swing?
So I remember when we first started this, the first year we did this, one of the statements that I made was that I love Amon-Ra St. Brown as a player, but don't like him for fantasy. I love him on my NFL team. I think he's a great player, but don't love him for fantasy. And I don't like to make the same mistake twice. When I look at Egbuka, this is someone who does everything required to stay on the field. As you mentioned, precise routes. Like, he will be exactly where he's supposed to be at that moment. Quarterbacks love that. Blocking ability. This is someone who, while he's not the biggest player, as we talked about, 6'1", 205, will put his head down and make plays. Hands unbelievable, reliable, strong concentration, does everything he needs, and can line up on the interior or exterior. I do think he'll be primarily a slot in the NFL, but can play every position. So what we have here is an extremely good football player who's going to get snaps right away and who is going to be reliable for his quarterback. I don't think that the lack of elite traits downplays the overall, perfect setup for what he is. Emeka Egbuka is as good as a person with his physical traits can be coming out of college, in my opinion. And I always like to bet on those reliable players. I think he's going to be a PPR monster.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about what he could be. I think when we talk about, slot heavy receivers, they're normally undersized. They're normally guys that the reason they play the slot is because they can't get off the line of scrimmage. They don't have the release package. The reason Emeka Egbuka plays the slot is because he's a phenomenal blocker and teams want to get him close to the ball to win in that game, but also because he's got natural feel against zone. And I think that's where he can operate. He's not a slot only player. I think he can play outside, but I think he's at his best out the slot because he's got those kind of natural skills there. A smooth operator. I think he is going to be a slightly lower ADOT player. I think he's probably going to come in around like 7, 8, maybe 9, kind of average depth of target rather than stretching down the field, which does mean he becomes a little bit more volume dependent. He's not a guy that's going to be able to see 4 or 5 targets and put up impressive fantasy numbers. He is going to need to be consistently commanding kind of 7, 8, 9 targets a week to be fantasy relevant. But I think this is a guy for me who I look at and I'm just like, I can see him being a fantasy wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 for the next like 8 years. And I think that's if you were giving me kind of percentage outcomes, that's like the most likely outcome is he is just solid, reliable. I think he's got a very small bust rate. I think he's got a very small kind of superstar rate, but that good in between bit, he's going to hit and he's going to be reliable. And I think, he could find a spot on 32 NFL teams and they certainly find a way to use him. But if you want more rookie profiles, though, hit the subscribe button down below. We are previewing every single fantasy relevant player you need to know for your rookie drafts. Looking at the numbers, obviously that absolute blow-up year in his sophomore season, whilst he was sharing the field with an incredible list of Ohio State wide receivers, do you think that he can come in and command that volume that he will need to be fantasy relevant? Or do you think he could take a little bit of time depending on where he lands and therefore could be a slow starter in a rookie season, or maybe someone we could target sort of mid-season in 2025 to acquire before the bump?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get that type of window. I think it's funny when we previewed one of his teammates in Garrett Wilson, we talked about how you don't really get a second-year bump of players that come out this polished. So when you try to think of that mid-year pickup, it's usually for players that have something they have to work on, have a fatal flaw that would keep them off the field and need to be coached up. I think he's going to hit the ground running. Now, does he command the volume? No, I think in reality, quarterbacks always have to get comfortable with rookies, but that could happen as early as training camp. And depending on the landing spot and where this player ends up, could be right out of the gate in that kind of Brock Bowers-ish spot where they just continue to grow and pepper him with targets because he's the person in that short to intermediate route, the chain moving routes that is in the right place at the right time. And as you mentioned, that blocking ability gets him on the field early. So he doesn't have to be coached up on physicality, doesn't be coached up on route running. So I don't know what would make us think that week 1 Egbuka is going to be much different than week 8 Egbuka, given the fact that he's coming out so polished. I always like that trend when we talk about players who maybe have a fatal flaw that's going to keep them off the field early, something that needs to be coached up, maybe didn't come out of a pro-style offense. These are players coming out of Ohio State. We know what Ohio State rookies tend to do right out of the gate. So I think he's going to be a buy high for me. I have him in my wide receiver 3 behind only Hunter and McMillan. I just believe that this is going to be an early hit rate. I don't see that late season discount for a player like this just because he's coming in so NFL ready.
2 months ago, I released a mock draft where I said Travis Hunter was my 101. 2 months on, I have not moved off that take. 6 foot, 188 pounds, out of Colorado. Mike, tell me you are just as excited about the potential of Travis Hunter in the NFL as I am.
I maybe am lower on Hunter than you, and I'm shocked because he is my wide receiver one. I'm not taking him at 101. I have him slotted in at 104 right now in my one quarterback rookie draft. But yes, I am so excited about Travis Hunter. This is not only one of the best wide receiving prospects we've seen in a few years at that level of a Marvin Harrison coming out of college, but he's also arguably the best athlete we have seen in a decade. I mean, this kid is an absolute unicorn. I mean, you're talking quickness, speed, explosiveness. I mean, ball tracking, body control, everything we talk about when we talk about true wide receiver ones. We've talked about elite body control with people coming out such as Jamar Chase. Like Travis Hunter is an absolute ball hawk, and he possesses this unbelievable understanding of the game, having played both sides of the ball. Now, all of this hype, Rich, why is he my 104? For two reasons. Number one, and you have it on there, is a wide receiver, cornerback. I do think he's going to see snaps at wide receiver no matter where he lands. However, we just talked about a player who just came out and said he wants to play both sides of the ball. And the question is, does that, just by coaching nature alone, limit his snaps that will keep him out of that 101 conversation? If he's playing at cornerback, can we actually expect 150 targets, 140 targets, true wide receiver one playmaking? Going to be on the field enough? Like, what's his snap share going to be? This player is so unique and so different to what we've seen in the past that it's almost impossible to figure out where he's going to end up. And doing actual projections on a player like this, he breaks the mold in such a good way. So unbelievable for the NFL. Top end wide receiver, top end cornerback. Like, when have we seen a player who really, if he just picked a position, would still be top of his position either way? The question for me just comes down to longevity and usage. Like, how do we make sure he's getting enough snaps to be effective without getting too many snaps where he's actually only at 85% of his own ability because he's playing both sides of the ball? I don't know, man. I don't know, but this is someone that I am betting on, and I'm pushing my chips in as the wide receiver one, but I just can't put him at 101 right now just because of those particular questions.
Yeah, before I dive into my thoughts, if you want my rookie analysis, if you want my rookie model and all of my rankings, hit the join button down below. You can sign up for as little as a cup of coffee a month and get a free copy of the rookie guide and all the Dynasty Fantasy best ball content you need to win your leagues. Right, let's just start at the top, right? For me as a prospect, he's absolutely elite. He's 95th percentile in my model. That comps very closely to my league neighbors. That's ahead of guys like Marvin Harrison. That's ahead of Chris Olave. That's ahead of Garrett Wilson, Drake London, all of those guys. That's for a guy that was a part-time wide receiver. Like, he only sat in defensive meeting rooms. He basically went out on the field, was told what route to run, and was able to produce at that level. Like, it's absolutely bonkers. I think that he is one of the best athletes I've ever seen. I think his ball tracking, hands, contested catchability for a guy that's not a big-bodied wide receiver is absolutely insane. I think he's a natural playmaker with the ball in his hands. As you said, that football IQ from playing both sides of the ball is absolutely otherworldly. The big question is he a corner? Is he a wide receiver? I said, if he's 100% snap share wide receiver, he's my 101 in 1QB, Superflex, whatever. I think he's elite. If he gets drafted and he's not 100% snap share wide receiver, I'm really concerned because I'm worried that he's not a guy that you can start week in, week out because you don't know what role he's going to play. But the more we've gone through this process, the more I've become convinced that I think he's going to be 100% snap share wide receiver that plays some corner. If you look at the NFL, let's take the Texans, for example. Who's more valuable to them, Nico Collins or Derek Stingley? It's Nico Collins, and he's not even a top 5 wide receiver in the league. Who's more valuable in the NFL, Justin Jefferson or Patrick Surtain? It's Justin Jefferson. I think an elite wide receiver is more valuable to NFL teams than an elite corner. And I think that's the reason they get paid more. I think that's the reason they'll get drafted ahead of them. And I really believe that Travis Hunter, if he goes 2 to the Browns, if he goes 3 to the Giants, if he goes 4 to the Patriots, I think he's going to be a wide receiver who can play some nickel and dime corner. And I think he's going to play both sides of the ball, but I'm really convinced that he is going to be an every down player on offense, first and foremost. And I just think that he could be absolutely incredible. And so I'm really happy chasing the upside, taking the risk. A little bit will rest on where he's drafted, what they announce when he is drafted, and what they immediately come out and say. But, we saw the Browns GM Berry come out and say at the Combine, they view him as a wide receiver, and I think they're going to be the team that drafts him. So, yeah, I'm very, very excited about what he could be. And I think it's mad, but if he does go to the Browns too, and they do call him wide receiver, I think he could be a top 12 dynasty wide receiver for me immediately.
I could definitely see that. And I wonder how much of his announcement is posturing, because the Browns did come out and say they see him as a wide receiver, and obviously the whispers about him not wanting to go to Cleveland, which I can't imagine why any player would want to go to Cleveland. I do have some concerns if he goes 3 to the Giants for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a fairly inept franchise, and number 2, as you mentioned, one of the top prospects from last year is already there, and obviously I think that actually harms both of them in what's never been a very high volume or efficiency passing offense in New York NFC East team. So I don't love that stop. However, New England, oh man, if he lands in New England, who already have 2 very high-end corners, obviously in Christian Gonzalez returning and Carlton Davis, with a very large need for weapons and somewhere for the volume to go, obviously sharing with Stephon Diggs. Oh man, that's where you're really itching to hit that draft button, even as high as 101. If he lands there, outstanding. So again, seeing where he lands, seeing where he comes out, where they're saying he's going to play is important. But yeah, I'm with you though on betting on the upside. Like, this is an extremely high-end athlete and a extremely, extremely talented wide receiver.
Speed kills in the NFL. So is the fastest wide receiver at this year's Combine going to be electric for fantasy? Mike, are you a fan of Matthew Golden, potentially, versatility, elite speed, or do you think there's some real flaws in his profile?
Well, there's definitely flaws. He is an average wide receiver with one elite skill, which is running forward. We do this all the time. And what's funny is, and what I love about the fantasy community is that when I say what his ceiling is and what you hope for, people are going to think it's an insult, which is silly in its own respect. But I mean, you're hoping that Matthew Golden becomes Brandon Cooks. That's truly what you're hoping for from this player, is Brandon Cooks. And that is a compliment to anyone who thinks that's knocking him. Brandon Cooks has been incredibly reliable for years. But we've seen players like this, and he's more likely going to fall into the latter category, which is someone who's fast and can, quote unquote, take the top off a defense, but isn't going to get consistent targets, isn't going to get consistent snap share, just not a great football player, but a very good speed guy. I mean, his route running's fine. You track the ball okay, not overly physical, doesn't go up and get the ball, not a big run blocker. And obviously we've seen foot issues from him in the past. There's some things with this prospect profile that should raise some flags for you. But first and foremost is the fact that he's just average, other than speed. And I think the overall hatred for Quinn Ewers has us really masking what this profile was. And every time I bring up any shortcoming in his game, or any other analyst does, they talk about how poor his quarterback play was. That doesn't make him a good player because his quarterback sucked. It actually means nothing. But watching this player, I see average NFL talent with elite speed, and cool. Some people like that, but overall, I just don't see a consistent target guy in the NFL.
Yeah, I'd also argue, I think he was quick, don't get me wrong, but watching the film, I never saw 4.2 speed. Like, if you'd have said to me, I think he's a low 4.4 guy, I think he's quick, but I don't think he's, electric. I think he has a nice throttle down. He's explosive out of his brakes, but I didn't see mind-blowing kind of top end speed. I think a lot of the 4.29 was because he's a former sprinter and he was quick, and you look at his 10-yard split being 1.49, that's lightning fast. And I think the sprinter start helped him more than being crazy fast. I agree with you. I don't love him as a profile. I'm consistently lower than consensus on him. I'm probably not going to have very many shares. I just think we're swimming in a world where his ceiling outcome is okay. It's like kind of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type, but that's his ceiling. And I don't think he's got a very high chance of hitting that ceiling, because I just think that he doesn't have the all-round game. I don't think he's a great route runner. I think he really struggles with the physical elements of the game. I think he gets knocked off his routes. I think he struggles 50-50 balls, certainly aren't, 50-50. So it's like, this is a quick guy. He's not great in like manufactured touches of, screens and yards after the catch ability. So it's just like, I don't really know what he is other than a nice complementary weapon that, as you said, takes the top off a defense and can kind of win there. And that's not a guy I really want on my fantasy team, because it leads to spike weeks that aren't reliable and I never know when to put him in the lineup. But if you want more rookie profiles other than Matthew Golden, though, hit the subscribe button. We're previewing every single person you need to know for your rookie drafts. I mean, you look at the numbers, Mike. He never had 1,000 yards in college. Now, yes, okay, Quinn Ewers, I'm a little bit harder than him in most, but he's had some pretty decent colleges. He's had some pretty decent production from the quarterback position. Do you think that lack of overall production is going to follow him to the next level?
Yeah, I like we've talked about with everything. I mean, of course it's going to follow him, because he's not a guy who is going to command targets. And I think if he was that player, we wouldn't have been torn on who's the best, even Texas wide receiver, between him and a very average at best Isaiah Bond. I mean, these are guys we weren't even sure who the wide receiver one going into the year was. And with most analysts, you would have found out that they were probably leaning Bond to begin the season. And to be in that situation and then think you're going to come in and be an alpha in the NFL is silly. And I also think, to go back to an earlier point that I wanted to make sure we hammered home with this particular player, as this is one thing I'm I guess, uniquely able to speak about, being a former college track athlete, is understanding the difference between 4.29 and 4.4 and what it means if you can come out of the blocks quickly. They're the exact same speed. A bad start 4.4 and a good start 4.29 is literally the exact same running speed. That's how important, if you have a track runner and people who have, and I think Xavier, why am I drawing a blank on his last name?
Xavier Worthy.
Thank you. Yeah, no, our this year, Miami receiver, the one who had a slow 4.4.
Xavier Restrepo.
Thank you. I think one thing that he talked about, which is completely valid, even though it was poo-pooed by the industry, is that practicing the 40 changes your time. Practicing the blocks, getting a running coach to put yourself in a position, an unnatural position you'll never be in the NFL, to come out of blocks on a straight line and just run straight with no actual barriers in front of you, never happens. I just don't know, prior to his 40 time, that anybody was seeing Matthew Golden as elite. He is a good receiver. Maybe we're knocking him a little bit too much in this podcast, but yeah, he's a complimentary piece.
Yeah, I'm happy betting on him not being good, and if he's good, I'll hold my hands up. But I think the range of outcomes, the likelihood is that he's a bust, and I'm happy taking that risk. If you like big-bodied ex-wide receivers, maybe Trey Harris is for you. Although he's slightly older at 23 years old, he showed some impressive ability to get open in a slightly interesting offense. Do you think that Trey Harris has got that potential to be an ex-superstar wide receiver at the next level?
He does, and I think that Trey Harris is the type of player that is almost the antithesis of what we talked about with Egbuka, which is natural athlete, goes and gets the ball, extremely physical. I mean, this guy will put bodies on people and make people hurt, which I love. Does decent with his route running, great yards after the catch, overall athlete, but he's not sharp and he's not consistent. And what you hope is that he lands in a spot where he can develop those traits and really move into that very high end role. But he has the size, he has the athleticism, he has everything you like out of a player. And I think with the right coaching, with the right opportunity, Trey Harris could jump off the page. I think even having him neck and neck with Matthew Golden right now might be too low, as Trey Harris might have arguably the highest ceiling in this group, outside of Travis Hunter has the highest ceiling possibly we've ever seen. So, when you look at it, Trey Harris might be the second highest ceiling player out of anybody here just because of the attributes. Absolutely love Trey Harris as an athlete, but there's a wide range of outcomes for this player, which is why we're talking about him sixth and not second.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into my thoughts, though, if you do want my rookie film analysis on every single prospect at this year's draft, plus my rookie models, rankings, and everything else you need for your rookie drafts, hit the join button down below. Silver tier and above, get a free copy of the rookie guide when it gets released the week after the NFL draft. Look, I feel like, Mike, this is our 4th or 5th year doing this, and I feel like every year we disagree on a prospect, and it's generally those big-bodied outside wide receivers that I always say I don't like because I think they get pushed up price-wise. The Calvin Johnson theory, where we're chasing those, big monster X wide receivers that are size, speed combinations, and it's just not for me.
Can we talk about who last year was? Can we talk about how last year was Brian Thomas, or you not want to bring that up?
No, that's fine. We can talk about that, but maybe we'll go back and talk about Treylon Burks or
valid.
Diami Brown before that. But I'll be honest, I really like Trey Harris this year. I think maybe I'm going to agree with you, and I think for me, what I dislike about the kind of the big-bodied outside receivers that are the size speed options is that generally they don't have the nuance. They don't have the route run ability. They don't have the field versus zone. It's just big guy, run fast, catch ball. Trey Harris isn't that. Like, he understands when to throttle down. I think he can stack and stem DBs very well. I think he's got a slightly slimmer route tree than I'd like to see, but I think he's a guy that's going to come into the league, be able to win on in-breaking routes, be able to win versus zone, be able to go deep. And I think that he can and will develop into something more. So, yeah, I really like him as a prospect. I don't love the fact that he was in college for 5 years. I don't love the fact that he's 23 and we're talking about him not being a fully polished, I think the blocking technique is pretty poor and will need work. And I think that's going to frustrate some coaches, but I think there's a player in here that I can get on board with. And I think that where he's going to end up going in rookie drafts and the cost that it's going to take to acquire, I'm really very interested. So yeah, I'm on board with Trey Harris. We'll probably find that this is the one big-bodied wide receiver that busts, and I sit here with egg in my face in 12 months' time.
This is a first for us. I thought this was going to be who we're going to argue against because I do love big wide receivers. They're my weakness. And you're right, I'm 1 for 3, but that's okay. The last one was really good. But yeah, this is I'm shocked by this. This is a very nice development for us to finally agree on a less than perfect large wide receiver. This is a first. I'm happy to see the growth in our relationship has led us here.
Beautiful. Well, let's all put our fingers together and, fingers crossed, pray that Trey Harris doesn't let us down. And he turns out to be what we hope he could be, which I think he's going to be a high value touch guy. I think we're going to see some downfield targets. I think he's going to be interesting in the red zone. And he's probably not going to command 150 targets, but I think he could be a top 24 receiver, seeing like 90 targets. I think he's going to be that type of player just because of the value of those targets and those touches and where they're going to come on the field.